Attention players, today we will be making a mask. The rules are simple. Failure to complete your mask in the allotted time will result in the player being eliminated. If you drop any crystals whilst crystalling your mask, you will be eliminated. Good luck, players. Korean thriller Squid Game has really taken the world by storm, and if you haven't heard of it, then you must have been living under a rock, because it is now the most viewed show ever on Netflix, and with good reason. It's absolutely brilliant. If you haven't watched it already, then I would highly recommend it. Yes, it's quite brutal, but the character development in it is just second to none. You really get invested in these characters, and oh my God, it's just amazing. Just watch it. So I had to do something from Squid Game. It wasn't in my original plan for Halloween, so I had to kind of pivot at the last minute, hence why this is a little bit late to the party. But I hope you all enjoy it, because today we are going to be making the boss's mask. Now, I'm not going to say who the boss is, because I'm not going to give any spoilers for those of you that haven't seen it. But the boss's mask is only seen for a very split second on the actual show itself. So there wasn't much reference on the internet for it. So I kind of used a little bit of artistic license and decided to go for a kind of a glam version of the boss's mask. So I present to you the crystallized owl. So starting off with a cheap plastic mask, you can buy these online or just in any Halloween or craft shop. And I'm just marking out the features of the owl, and then the owl has got these big kind of ears, for want of a better word. So I created these out of just some normal paper and just shaped them to fit the mask and glued them on with some PVA glue. Now basically what you want to do is create a kind of an armature, so basically the shape of the owl's face. It doesn't need to be perfect, because you will be covering this in crystals. Now, the benefit of crystals is that they hide a multitude of sins. So whereas most of the masks in Squid Game actually had this kind of smooth mirrored effect, sort of mirrored mosaic tiles almost, the actual boss mask had more like spikes, sort of gold spikes. But I decided to go for crystals, A, because I didn't have any gold spikes, and B, because I thought the crystals would look really glam and sparkly and eye-catching. And like I said, they hide a multitude of sins. So although you need to get this armature as good as you can, it doesn't need to be perfect, like I said. So you create the beak in the way that you just saw me doing there with the paper, the same as you did the ears, and just simply glue that on with some PVA. And glue the ears on. Now, this does take a little bit of finagling, for want of a better word, but you will get there in the end. Now, I created the ears way too big, so I did have to cut them down. I also just affixed them in place with a little bit of masking tape just while that glue dries, because they had a tendency to kind of slide on that plastic mask. Now, the owl mask has little tiny round eye holes, so I created these by just getting some muslin and marking out a round eye hole shape, cutting out the hole and sticking it over the mask, just to create this smaller eye hole rather than the big kind of human shaped eye holes that I had on the mask to begin with. Here you see me just making those ears smaller, as mentioned earlier. Now, to prevent the ears looking like they're just kind of stuck on, and to create a smoother transition down from the ear to the face, like on the actual mask itself, I just used some more muslin and just kind of smoothed that around the edges of where the ear meets the mask and just glued that in place. I hope that makes sense. You can see what I'm doing on the screen there. I always find it really difficult to film these kind of down on the table tutorials. I'm always worried that you can't quite see what I'm doing. If anybody knows of a better way to film these kind of shots, let me know. At the moment, I've got like a little attachment that goes on my tripod where I can angle my camera down, and it does a pretty good job, but I'm sure there's a better way to do it. So if anybody has a better way to do it, let me know in the comments below. Can't seem to find much information online for this kind of thing. So anyway, back to the tutorial. So now that I've glued those in place, I'm just gluing around the back as well, just to make sure that they are nice and firmly on that mask. And I also did the same, incidentally, around the beak, which you will see me doing later. Now, to create the kind of rounded cheeks that the owl mask has, I just took some cotton wool, and rather than sculpting it with latex like I would ordinarily, I did exactly the same process but with PVA glue. This meant that you get a much harder base once it's dried. So you can see me there just smoothing the cotton wool with the PVA. Now this was a little bit fiddly, I'm not going to lie, and you don't get a completely smooth surface, but that doesn't really matter because, like I said earlier, you'll be covering it with crystals anyway, and that hides a multitude of bumps and lumps and all sorts. I did the same process on the kind of brow area to create the owl brows, and I just smoothed all of this down with both my fingers and my spatula, just to get the basic shape in place. Now I also had to cover over the mouth because the mouth kind of dips in on my mask. So again, I just used some muslin and just put this over and glued it just so there was kind of a smoother transition rather than a dipped in mouth. And I also used the muslin technique just to kind of blend the beak to the face so it wasn't just a stuck-on beak. Again, this was a little bit fiddly, I'm not going to lie, because I had to kind of fold the muslin underneath. But once muslin is soaked with PVA glue, it's actually really malleable, and it's really, you can almost kind of sculpt it. I used to use this technique on my body cast to sculpt kind of draped fabric on them when I was a body cast artist a few years ago. Now, the one downside of PVA glue is it does take a long time to dry. I mean, I left this overnight thinking it'd be dry the next day and I could start painting and crystallizing it, but it wasn't dry. So I actually just put the heating on and put it on top of the radiator, and this just helped dry it out a little bit quicker. Right, anyway, once it's completely dry, you want to then just paint it so you've got a nice smooth base to put the crystals on. I just painted the whole thing black. Although the crystals will cover the majority of it, you will still be able to see little gaps between the crystals unless you want to spend literally hours and hours and hours filling them in with the tiniest crystals, which, trust me, you don't want to. As it was, it took me 4.5 hours to crystallize this, so yeah, paint the whole thing black and let it dry. And then you want to just take some blue tack and put it on the end of either a pencil or a pen or a makeup brush. This is just to help you pick up your crystals. This will make your job so much easier, trust me, because you do not want to be picking up your crystals individually with either your fingers or tweezers, because you will literally be there all day, probably all week actually. I started off using gem tack, which is a special glue for sticking gems on, because I also used to crystallize shoes back in the day. Yes, I've had a lot of businesses and creative projects and stuff, but I soon worked out that actually PVA does just as good a job, so don't go out and buy gem tack, you don't need it. And now you start the very long process of sticking all your gems on. I used a mix of sizes and colours just to add some interest, and I stuck them on in a random fashion because I prefer this approach. You can do yours more uniform if you like, but actually, although I actually think the random approach looks better, it's also a lot easier because you're creating a bit of a rod for your own back if you try and do it uniform. Anyway, this is a very, very long process, but it's kind of quite relaxing in an odd kind of way. I would recommend sticking on your favourite show and just sitting in front of the TV doing it. I would recommend Squid Game while you're doing this. It's a great show to watch while you're crystallising your boss mask. So anyway, I am going to speed this bit up because you do not want to sit through 4.5 hours of footage of me crystallising an owl mask. So here we go. Let's speed this sucker up. Nearly there, nearly there. This is quite hard on your back, neck and shoulders, I'm not going to lie. So if you've got anybody that will give you a nice little massage afterwards, that really helps too. And the last few gems and we are done. Look how sparkly it is. It's so sparkly. And that is our mask complete. So you can pair this with just a normal dress or suit and just some lovely glam makeup and a red wig if you have one. If you know, you know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this Beauts. Happy Halloween. Love you all. Thanks for watching. See you soon.